Today on the podcast, I'm talking to fellow sports dietitian and exercise physiologist Gary Slater. He's the program coordinator for the master's degree in sports nutrition at the University of the Sunny Coast, and he's also the National Performance Nutrition Network lead, say that 10 times fast, at the Australian Institute of Sport. But the reason I've got Gary on today is because he's got a really keen interest in body composition manipulation and measurement. And one of the things I see triathletes really struggle with is how to change their body composition when everyone wants to be leaner and faster, and then also how to measure that. If you don't know what you're looking for in terms of measuring body composition, then you're probably doing this wrong as well. Gary is always N=1. He likes to test things and try things out on himself first. And when he's not working, you'll find him either kneeboarding at Moffat Beach or working on his own muscle hypertrophy in the gym. So what I want you to get out of today's episode is understanding, well, first and foremost, why do you want to change your body composition? And if that is realistic and achievable and beneficial to your performance. And then two, how do you actually track that you are doing what you set out to achieve? Are you losing body fat and maintaining your muscle? Are you gaining muscle when you want to be gaining muscle? So we're going to dive a little bit into the science, but also the practicalities about how to manipulate your body composition as a triathlete, whether it's useful and beneficial, and then how to measure it accurately so that you know that you're getting a true change. So I want you to stop weighing yourself constantly throughout the week or multiple times a day and use some of the tools that we talk about today instead. Welcome to the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast, the show designed to serve you up evidence-based sports nutrition advice from the experts. Hi, I'm your host Taryn, accredited practicing dietitian, advanced sports dietitian, and founder of Dietitian Approved. Listen as I break down the latest evidence to give you practical, easy to digest strategies to train hard, recover faster, and perform at your best. You have so much potential, and I want to help you unlock that with the power of nutrition. Let's get into it. All right, welcome to the podcast, Gaza.
Thanks, Darren.
So what I wanted to talk to you today about is body composition and how we measure it and how we manage it, because I feel like that is probably your specialty / passion / obsession, maybe.
Perhaps. It's been a really interesting journey through that pathway. And as with most things you've got a genuine interest in professionally, there's probably some personal interests that have come from that. And I kind of feel like I'm a constant experiment on myself in regards to physique manipulation. It's a really enjoyable space, but it's one in which I think a lot of people don't necessarily have a very good understanding in regards to the ways in which you can assess body composition, but then also from an athlete perspective, how important body composition is to their overall sporting success.
Totally agree. With triathletes being an endurance sport in particular, it's often beneficial to be lighter because you're faster, because you have to carry that weight across a certain distance, right? You've got to put one foot in front of the other. Often leanness is associated with fastness and speed, but that's often at the detriment of not having enough energy availability or recovering really poorly or missing out on key nutrients because they don't actually know how to manipulate their body composition in the right way.
You're so right, Taryn. It's a really important issue that needs to be given a lot of consideration before a person goes down a pathway of exploring weight loss in this example, because there are potential negative implications from it. You've spoken about with limitation in regards to energy availability, compromising fueling and recovery. And so the quality of training just backs right off. And if you're not getting quality training, you're not getting quality adaptations. The other thing that we also recognise is that it can change the way a person perceives themselves. And there's also the other potential issues in regards to when a person is lean, they increase their risk of loss of lean tissue or muscle mass. While people are focused on body fat, it's really important to keep in mind the muscle mass because it's the power generator. And so when we talk body composition, we should be talking about being able to assess both fat mass, but also lean mass and skeletal muscle mass.
That's one of the biggest mistakes I see athletes make, is that they just use the scales as their measure of weight loss. But we know that the scales are a really poor measure of body composition change because they can fluctuate with so many different factors, like how hydrated you are or dehydrated you are, what your hormones are doing across a month, how much bulk you've got in your gut, like your stool bulk, if you've had more fiber the day before or less fiber. If we're carb loaded, so your muscle glycogen levels are really full, you might be a bit heavier. And if you maybe ate just more food that day. So people have no understanding really of the intricacies of what happens to drive the numbers on the scales. They just do it and then get disheartened when it increases for no particular reason or it decreases and they're not really sure what's going on there as well.
I think you've summarised it really well. Like for me, scale mass is a really blunt tool for being able to track body composition change over time. And when I'm working with clients, I might set something up so that they might weigh in a couple of times a week. And the reason why I do it a couple of times is to account for some of those nuances that you spoke about. Changes in hydration status, changes in gut contents, changes in muscle glycogen, all those factors just add more noise into the measure where you're trying to be able to pick up these really small changes in fat and lean tissue. Because for me, if I'm looking at trying to reduce fat mass for a relatively lean athlete, I might be looking at a change in fat mass of no more than, say, half a kilo a week. And that can be difficult to be able to pick up when you've got all these other variables contributing to changes in weight. And again, the reason why I weigh a couple of times a week and I get an average of that, I'm not looking at the change between those 2 days. I'm trying to get an average of those and then compare one week to the next, but always in conjunction with another measure of composition, because scales are merely a measure of heaviness. They're not a measure of composition.
Do you have any tips for when somebody should weigh themselves and how they should weigh themselves to get the most accurate results?
The evidence that suggests the best time to weigh yourself is first thing in the morning. So, if you've got a set of scales at home, jump up, have a quick wee, empty your bladder, jump on the scales in minimal clothing. If you're at home, jump on the scales nude and use that to start your day. When you've done your wee, have a look in the toilet. Is it light or is it dark? And helping to use that to infer what's happening from a change perspective. And again, trying to get those couple of times a week without becoming anal associated with it to be able to get an average value and then to get rid of some of that noise.
So, for all the data nerds and engineers and scientists out there that weigh themselves every day and look at trends,
All you're picking up on changes in weight from one day to the next are all of those noise variables. Changes in muscle glycogen, changes in hydration status. How long was it since you did number 2? There's simply no value associated with that. I think it starts to have a negative impact on someone from a psychological perspective. No more than a weigh-in once or twice a week. Do it first thing in the day. Don't weigh yourself at any other time of the day, because all you're going to be picking up is food and fluid content over the day.
perfect. So, if we're looking at tracking some changes in body composition, what's the best way to actually measure what's going on?
The answer to that will depend on the outcome that you're after or the measure that you're after. If you need an absolute measure of body composition, you need to know your absolute fat mass, your absolute lean mass, then you would need to go and get something like a DEXA scan. But for most individuals, and especially most triathletes, because you're not a weight category sport or anything like that, we'd be looking at assessing body composition simply to be able to track change and to be able to assess. So you've set up a meal plan and a training program. You set your meal plan up with your sports dietitians so that it's supporting fueling and recovery, but also small reductions in body fat over time. A set of skin fold calipers in the hands of a highly skilled technician, such as a trained sports dietitian, can be invaluable. Now, you won't get an absolute measure of your composition. You won't get an absolute measure of fat mass or lean mass, but the changes in your skin fold values as well as the changes in your body weight can really help the sports dietitian to ascertain whether or not the weight loss that's coming off is coming off primarily as fat or it's a combination of other tissues. And then that allows the dietitian to be able to further personalise the dietary strategy for you. Or we've cut back on energy too much and you're losing weight too quickly, you're not fueling and recovering adequately, and you might be potentially compromising your lean tissue. We need to increase your energy and take a little bit more. Or my weight's stable, my skin folds haven't changed. Okay, we need to be able to find some spaces in the day over a couple of days of the week where we can create a little bit of a negative energy balance. That is calories in less than calories out.
So, for somebody that doesn't know what skin folds are you able to explain briefly what that is and how it works?
Sure. Effectively, we could talk about them being a very expensive set of barbecue tongs. And what we do with those is they've got a dial on them similar to a watch face. And you use that to be able to assess the thickness of a compressed double fold of skin. We typically do that across 7 sites of the body, some on the lower body, some on the upper body, so that we accommodate the nuances of where different people store fat. And so we know that males typically store it around the central part of their body through their torso, whereas females primarily store it on the lower parts of their body. So we cover both upper and lower body. Doing that across the 7 sites, we get a sum of those values, and then we can use that information to be able to track change longitudinally. Some people will have an interest in being able to try and convert that into an estimate of composition, so fat and lean tissue. And there are equations you can use to be able to provide those estimates, but none of them have been validated in a triathlon community, for example. And so that the numbers are kind of meaningless. And so we need to be able to get really comfortable in just looking at changes in weight and changes in the sum of 7 skin folds.
And making sure that your anthropometrist, the person that does your skin folds, is actually qualified to do so too. I see a lot of PTs that go through a quick training in their course, try and do it. And the reliability of those repeated measures and tracking that change over time, like you'll get a number, but that number is pretty wild. It's not likely to be particularly accurate. So if you're going to do skin folds, we want to make sure that you've got a trained anthropometrist that has to do certain number of profiles every 3 years to keep their accreditation, keep their expensive calipers calibrated properly as well. There's a whole lot of cost and time and retraining every few years to make sure that you are doing them as accurate as possible as well.
Perhaps people underestimate the skills that are required to go through that process, because when you do it with an ISAC trained practitioner, as you're alluding to, Taryn, so ISAC's International Society for the Advancement of Anthropometry, and the international group, aren't we so glad that they just summarise it as ISAC? The other main training group that provides skills in that space, a level 1 technician, they've done at least 3 days full time covering off on the technique required for that, then go away and do 20 repeat profiles. They've got to come back with a finite repeatability, and that has to be done, as you've alluded to, every 4 years to maintain that qualification. If the person that's doing your skin folds is not leaving little marks on your body from the pen marking, the little crosses, it's highly likely they're not ISAC qualified. It's a quick process, but without someone that has appropriate training in that space, the numbers are effectively random. And you couldn't use that to be able to track longitudinal change. Again, the great thing, and I don't mean to repeat myself, is that any accredited sports dietitian will also be ISAC accredited, and they'll have the skills in being able to set up a meal plan for a person to be able to support them on their weight loss journey. Perhaps more importantly, be able to make an informed opinion as to whether or not the person needs to change their body composition, but then also support them through that journey of weight loss and to track change, and then to be able to adjust their plan based on how they're responding. Because it won't be a set and forget, unfortunately. You can start off losing weight really effectively, but then training changes, for example, or we get some metabolic adaptations that ensures that might then need to make adjustments thereafter. And that's again where getting someone on board, an accredited sports dietitian, to support the person through that journey is just so very important to help support the goals they're trying to be able to achieve, but also to avoid the potential negative implications of that weight loss journey.
You just answered my next question, Gaz, and that's just around where would somebody actually start if they want to start changing their body composition? Let's take a step right back to that.
I think the first question then is, does the person actually need to change their body composition? I don't think people give enough consideration to that. And they think weight loss journey, no negatives, I'm just going to get lighter and lean and my run is going to be so much better. But as you alluded to right at the start, there are potential negative implications. There might be compromises in fueling and recovery. Sustained for a very long period of time, we know there can be more significant health and performance detriments as well. And that's where I think engaging with a sports dietitian, perhaps having an assessment of their body composition through skin folds. The great thing about triathlon is we've got some normative data on elite individuals. So you compare where you're at versus an elite, and then make an informed opinion with your sports dietitian, but probably also your coach when you think about the type of training you're doing at the moment. Is there likely to be benefit for me in undertaking a weight loss journey? Or I'm actually doing really well right now, and I need to focus more on being able to better support fueling and recovery and getting better training adaptations, because weight loss is not always associated with performance enhancement, and we need to keep that in mind.
Often in practice, I see people that come in because they want to lose fat for a particular race, and they're under fueling and bonking in long sessions and then playing catch up on rest days. And one of my strategies I implement with a lot of people is actually giving them more fuel where they need it. So making them eat strategically through those bigger, harder, longer sessions where they actually are burning more muscle glycogen. And as a result of better fueling, they can train harder, burn more calories through their session, and often will lose body fat by doing that, by actually fueling more aggressively. And it's hard to actually see that unless you're doing something like skim folds, because that change often isn't reflected in the scales. They might gain weight on the scales through that process. And if you weren't doing something like skim folds to see that change of reduced fat and increased muscle, you'd be disheartened by that whole process.
And this comes back to what we were alluding to before in regards to scales being a really blunt tool. I often find, especially with age group triathletes, that some people come into triathlon through their weight loss journey and they started to do some exercise, maybe they started to run or ride, and they've got into triathlon. And I think they come in with that mentality of restrict, restrict, restrict. And what they need to recognize is the days in the week where you've got big training volumes, that you need to allow your food intake to come up. You know, one of the things that separates athletes, triathletes from their sedentary counterparts is that your energy requirements vary from one day to the next. And I find some of these triathletes feel really comfortable in moderating their energy intake on a lower training day or a non-training day, which is fine. But they feel really constrained in regards to allowing their energy budget, their food intake to come up on the days when they're doing more work. And again, that's the value of a sports dietitian. A triathlete can't eat the same 7 days of the week. You'll have bigger fueling days where you need to put more carbohydrate in the system, and you need to feel comfortable with that. And on days when you're not doing as much work, then you can moderate things off a little bit. And the other point that comes to mind for people on their weight loss journey is they feel more comfortable in pulling calories back on those big training volume days. You're compromising fueling. I don't think about, creating a calorie deficit over the 7 days of the week. There might be 3 or 4 half days of the week that we create our calorie deficit. And typically I try and do that as far away from training as possible so that you're not compromising fueling and recovery. The other big thing that you mentioned before, this should be a fat loss journey when justified, as opposed to a weight loss journey. And the only way you're going to be able to track changes in your fat mass is to measure body composition. And as we've said multiple times, scales are a very blunt tool for assessing composition. Go out, engage with a sports dietitian, get some regular skin folds, get on a baseline assessment to be able to ascertain whether or not it would be appropriate for you to be able to consider reducing your body fat levels. Look at your training block over the next 10 to 12, 16 weeks, because that's potentially the time frame that might be required to be able to support your weight loss journey, and then make an informed decision as to whether or not it would be appropriate to start that now, or no, I'm going through a big block in readiness for an important race. I am going to be a much better athlete at this next race by actually supporting fueling and recovery goals, as opposed to just trying to focus on weight loss.
I'm so glad you said that, Gaz. One of the biggest mistakes people make is eating the same thing all the time as triathletes. And when you do 3 disciplines, when you're swimming, cycling, and running, because we're overachievers, no training day is the same. And so you need to eat differently on a lighter day versus a heavier day, and a long session on the weekend potentially, or a brick. That's one of the first things I do with people is teach them that. Something I go through in the Triathlon Nutrition Academy really deeply is how to actually periodize your nutrition to your training periodization. So I'm so glad you said that as well, because it's something I bang on about all the time, and it's nice to have the same message repeated from a different brain.
Just so important, like the small number of athletes that I engage with, if it's a triathlete, for example, I tend to spend most of the session actually getting a good understanding of their training, because it's the training that dictates the energy budget. It's the training that dictates the fueling requirements for that person, and recognizing that it can vary over the 7 days of the week, and that it'll also vary over your micro and your macro cycles. And that's something that I think we take for granted as nutrition care professionals, but it's very difficult for an athlete to be able to achieve. And that's why I think an investment to see a sports dietitian, to be able to set up a training program and then race plans, is the best investment you'll make.
Heard it here first, folks. People spend a lot of money on a coach and a training program, and they spend 10 to 20 grand on a bike, and then they eat shit food. I guess it doesn't make any sense to my dietitian brain that you would do that, because I think there's a sweet spot where training intersects nutrition. And when you have both of those, that little Venn diagram, when that overlaps, there's this sweet spot in the middle that I call the supercharged zone. that's where you've really dialed in your nutrition to support training, and you still may be performing in sessions and you still may be driving some fat loss and muscle gain if it's really perfectly planned. But that's where you're actually going to get the best bang for your buck out of your training and your money spent doing all of the things, as well as your body composition there as well. So thanks for backing me up in that, Gaz.
Yeah, we're probably not very good at fig jamming ourselves as a profession. And look, the other thing when you're talking about a justified fat loss journey, that it takes time. If I'm thinking about half to maybe a maximum of a kilo fat loss per week and a person's got 6 kilos to lose of fat, that might take them 3 to 4 months to be able to achieve. And for me, the longer, the slower, the better. But I think their head can get in the way and they're not seeing these changes on the scales. It's like, what's going on? I need to cut back more. And then they really cut back. They compromise training quality. They bonk on a long ride. All they think about is food. They go and gorge on food. They feel bad about that. And so it becomes a really vicious cycle. And I don't want to sound like I'm an advertisement for sports dietitians, but it's a relatively complex issue that requires highly scientific information to be able to piece together a meal plan that will support fueling, recovery, and optimization of body composition. And then having a person also that can help track that change and to be able to manipulate that to further personalize it for the other person. And that's where having a sports dietitian in your back pocket to be able to support you through that weight loss journey, I think is so important, because they're able to track what's happening for you, not on average, but what's happening for you, and then to be able to further personalize it to achieve that long-term goal, so that you can get to the start of the next important race, have achieved your body composition goals, but also had really, really good training quality and know you're going to race a whole lot better as a consequence.
Unreal. So let's shift gears a little. You mentioned DEXA before. What is a DEXA, and when would it be useful for a triathlete to add that to their toolkit?
So DEXA is primarily been used to be able to assess bone health. It's the diagnostic tool that you would go to an imaging centre to be able to get your bone mineral density assessed and to be able to assess your overall bone health. Probably over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a recognition of the potential value of DEXA to be able to track body composition change. It's nuanced by the fact that there is a small amount of radiation exposure associated with it. It's not different to the amount of radiation exposure you get in normal daily living, what we call background radiation exposure. But it is a source of radiation exposure, and as a consequence, there will be a limitation on the number of DEXA scans a person can have. Typically, that's no more than about 4 a year. And so that's where the challenge is. Like, if we're thinking about this weight loss journey and we want to be able to track longitudinal change, if you could only have a DEXA scan every 12 weeks, it's not actually going to allow you to be able to further personalize your intervention. You could go 12 weeks and say, oh, we haven't created an energy deficit. Damn. And my body fat levels haven't changed. And that's where things like the surface anthropometry becomes a benefit, because you could do skin folds every 4 weeks or so with a person. And so you're not allowing too long a time period without assessments to be able to then adjust your meal plan. Some of the benefits associated with DEXA, it provides us with information in regards to whole body composition, but also regional composition. I used to love, when I was doing a lot of DEXA scanning, sitting down and being able to tell a person if they were left or right-handed, because if you're right side dominant, you're opening doors, you're carrying bags with your right arm, you'll carry more lean mass and more bone mineral density in your right arm compared to your left arm. It provides us with a measure of fat mass, fat-free mass, as well as bone mass. It's often been termed the gold standard for body composition assessment. That probably isn't justified. It's a good tool, but you need to know how to utilize it appropriately. And I've seen numerous examples where a person is able to manipulate how they presented a DEXA scan for a decrease or an increase in fat-free mass of upwards of a couple of kilos. One of the beauties of skin folds is just so robust. It's not influenced by diet or exercise beforehand. Your body weight is, obviously, but the DEXA scan will be influenced by what you consume food and fluid-wise in the day beforehand, and also exercise. And so typically, if you go to get a DEXA scan from a group that are really informed and know how to utilize DEXA, there'll be guidance provided for at least the day before your DEXA scan to make sure that you present for your DEXA scan the following morning really well hydrated, glycogen replete, not super compensated. You don't carb load for it, but we don't want you to go in there, on a Monday morning after you've spent 6 hours on the saddle the day beforehand. And the person would come in overnight fasted, bladder voided, a little bit like what we're doing a scale weight, to get that accurate measure of body composition. I guess the question is, does a triathlete need to know their absolute fat mass and their absolute lean mass if it's about going on a body composition change journey? And I'd argue that they possibly don't. If it was about a person coming back from injury, let's say they've had to have knee surgery or something like that, and they've had to completely unload their leg for a period of time, that they're really vulnerable there to losses of lean tissue. We know how important lean tissue is to success. And so you might have a DEXA scan there to be able to assess the lean tissue or the muscle mass that's been on the injured leg compared to the non-injured leg to be able to make sure their rehab has progressed well. I think for the majority of people, the most valuable tool is merely tracking changes in skin folds over time in conjunction with a good measure of body mass. As we alluded to before, upon waking, do wee-wees beforehand, jump on the scale semi-naked. If you are weighing in at a commercial gym or a swimming pool, I'll probably keep your clothes.
So with lots of body composition measures, you can cheat the system in a way. I don't think there's a way to cheat skin folds, but DEXA, you can certainly cheat the system. A BIA, there's other ways you can cheat measuring your body composition. When it comes to a DEXA, how do we know that there's been an actual change in body composition shift compared to, say, skin folds, which we're measuring at the millimetre level?
So what we're talking about there, Taryn, is precision error, or as I like to call it, just the noise in the test. Every single test that's done has noise in it. We could use a simple blood test. You can go and get your blood cholesterol taken. If you run it through the machine 2 times, you potentially get 2 slightly different values. With both skin folds and DEXA, we know there's noise in the test as well. We know the factors that contribute to that, and we can minimize that. As I've alluded to, you go to an imaging center that really know what they're doing in regards to things like DEXA. They'll provide you with guidance in regards to what to do from a food and fluid intake perspective the day beforehand. Same thing, try and do it after a day of rest, come in overnight fasted, et cetera, et cetera. When all of that is done, you can still have noise in the measurement of upwards of 1 to 2 kilos. And so you think about, if I want to drop 4 kilos of fat mass, and that takes me 10 to 12 weeks, I've got to see a change in my DEXA scan of greater than 1 to 2 kilos, depending on what the noise in the specific machine you're using, before I can say it's a real change. And that, I guess, is one of the limitations associated with DEXA for tracking longitudinal change. You've got to have a real change that's greater than the noise in the measurement. And we also need to know what the noise in the measurement is. And so you probably need to engage an imaging center that have actually gone through that process. It's relatively detailed. They'll typically get a minimum of 20 people come through. Often they'll do a test retest. So they DEXA scan them, they hop off the DEXA scan and they hop back on. I don't think that's probably the best way to be able to look at the noise in the measurement, because it doesn't take into consideration what we call biological error, or the changes in muscle glycogen content, the changes in gastrointestinal tract contents, the changes in hydration status that we would see with a person during their weight loss journey. And so the way that you might assess that noise is you would scan them today, but then scan them again tomorrow. And that noise in the measurement, we know, increases when you do a between-day comparison. And it can be upwards of a couple of kilos. When we look at the noise in skin folds, with a trained technician, you're talking about a noise of about 1 to 2 millimeters across skin folds that could vary from, say, 40 mils in an elite male athlete through to 90 or 100 mils or more in a female athlete. And so one of the other beauties about skin folds is it's just such a robust tool. It's not influenced by food intake, fluid intake beforehand, exercise, although it's not very nice to do skin folds on an athlete after exercise, obviously, because they're a bit sweaty. But we're typically trying to infer body composition change from the changes in skin folds plus weight. And obviously weight is influenced by food and fluid intake, hydration status, etc. But you can do skin folds at any time of the day. You might just use that waking weight as your measure. And I'm not concerned if an athlete does that assessment of their body weight at home on their scales. Their scales could be out by 10 kilos. I don't care, as long as they're consistently out. Because all I'm really interested in is that change score during their weight loss journey, as opposed to the absolute value.
That's perfect, Gaz. So for any triathlete out there that's looking to change their body composition, whether it's to lean up, put on more muscle, first and foremost, probably need to engage somebody that can help you do that in an evidence-based way. And then please, 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 if you learned nothing else today, throw out your scales or just stop weighing yourself every single day and then multiple times a day, because the number's only going to go up as the day goes on. And utilize something with a skilled professional like SkimFold. So you're looking for somebody that's ISAC accredited. I'll actually do another episode on SkimFolds, and we'll deep dive into some of the things around how it works and when you would do it and what you need to look for if you're getting someone to do your SkimFolds. Like Gaz said earlier, if you haven't been marked up, then chances are your results are going to be a little bit bogus.
Great summary, Taryn.
So stop weighing yourself all the time. Maybe once or twice a week, first thing in the morning, nude ideally, unless you're out in public. Do a wee, don't eat or drink anything, and that is ideally what your weight is. Maybe you start doing that once a week to track some change, but don't be disheartened if it bounces around a fair bit. There's no point weighing yourself every day. That's only just going to mess with your head. And then try and use something as a tool to track the change in body fat and muscle with something like SkimFolds. And hey, if you wanted to do a DEXA, let me know, send me a message and I can direct you on some places that do a good quality DEXA scan, because like anything, there are places that don't do a great scan and there are places that do a good scan. And they're all going to give you a piece of paper that says, here's your data. Whether that data is actually true and accurate or not is another thing. And hey, don't get me started on BIA. That'll be another episode. We're not going to deep dive into that rabbit hole because Gary and I might get a bit all hot and sweaty and flustered talking about BIA scans. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Gaz. I know you're spending time with me on your holidays, so I'll let you go and go for a surf or grab a coffee or take the dog for a walk and enjoy the rest of your break.
I'll do all three. Thanks, Taryn.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast. I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want to share with me what you've learnt, email me at podcast@dietitianapproved.com. You could also spread the word by leaving me a review and taking a screenshot of you listening to the show. Don't forget to tag me on social media at dietitian.approved so I can give you a shout out too. If you want to learn more about what we do, head to dietitianapproved.com. And if you want to learn more about the Triathlon Nutrition Academy program, head to dietitianapproved.com/academy. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to helping you smash it in the fourth leg. Nutrition!